Okay, can we now go to Mark 3:14? I want to talk about teams. Missions is teams. Mark 3:14, and he ordained 12 that they should be with him and that he might send them forth to preach. He ordained 12. Do you think Jesus needed 12 men? Do you think Jesus actually needs me? No. But it hit me when I was studying about how God always used teams when it came to missions. I wanted to study a little bit more about teamwork, and the Lord said, Jesus had a team of 12 men. 12 men. Jesus had a 3.5-year mission trip. He was on the earth for 33 and a half years or so, but he had a 3.5-year mission trip. And for 3.5 years, Jesus went around Galilee, Judea, Samaria, a little bit around the region, a little bit into some Gentile areas there as well. But for 3.5 years, he did the mission that his Father gave him, and he did it with a team of 12 men. Teams. And I want to talk to you about one of the biggest mistakes that I believe we've made in missions is to chop away the team and to ask a man and his wife to go to the world somewhere and to do it alone without a team. I remember having a lot of debates with people about the argument that Paul and Barnabas had on the second missionary journey. Remember that? They were going to go back again, and they were going to revisit all the cities that they had been to. And John Mark was part of the first mission team. Paul, the Holy Spirit said, separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work whereunto I have called them. And it said, and they had John Mark to their minister. So I don't know exactly what John Mark's role was, but I can tell you this. If you start doing missions journeys and missions teams, you will need people to be your minister. Like you will need, there are so many things involved in putting together missions journeys and missions teams that you've got to have people like John Mark. John Mark at that point may not have been the best preacher, may not have been the best discipler, who knows, but he was their minister. And he didn't last long, did he? Because they got over to the island of Cyprus, and then after they traveled through Cyprus and went north, as soon as they hit the mainland north to go into the rest of Galatia, he left and he went back to Jerusalem. And we know nothing other than he left the work. So now, we understand that Barnabas had a special relationship with Mark because it was his uncle. We also know that Barnabas his name is the son of consolation. We know that Barnabas has a very tender, reconciliatory, did I say that right? Reconciliatory heart. So they go on the second missionary journey, and Barnabas says, let's take John. And it got heated. And I've heard people say, man, Paul is a bit of a hard man. Maybe Paul wasn't forgiving. Paul wasn't merciful. Barnabas had that tender heart, because look, later on, Paul says, bring me John Mark. He's profitable for the ministry. And he did become profitable for the ministry. But why was Paul so adamant he don't go? Because Paul knew the success of the mission is heavily dependent on the team. If you are in a team sport, it doesn't matter how talented the quarterback is. It doesn't matter how talented one or two people are there. Did you know teams never win because of individual talent? Right. In fact, you can have a team that has less individual talent, but they know how to work as a team and they win. And Paul knew, I can't do the work that we're doing without a team, and I'm not quite sure he's ready to be part of the team. I can't have you abandon ship partway through. It will hinder greatly what we're doing. Everything we look at in the Bible, they always had teams. Second missionary journey, Paul and Silas go, and they come along to Derbe, and they pick up Timothy. Somewhere along the line, they pick up Titus. They get to Troas, and they pick up Luke. And eventually, Aquila and Priscilla get saved in Corinth, and they join the team. Apollos gets saved and becomes part of the team. And you actually see that as Paul is moving through the Roman Empire and churches are being established, he's actually picking up more members of the team as he goes. And it is incredible to watch the development of the teams. And you would be amazed how, by the way, you'd be amazed how early churches got involved in missions and got involved in teams. Do you remember when, where's the first place Paul went on the second missionary journey? After revisiting the churches, he ended up in Philippi. And he was in Philippi. God guided him down to those women who got saved. And then he cast out the demon. They had the whole Philippian jailer exercise there. And eventually they got expelled out and they went down to Thessalonica. So what did they leave behind in Philippi? They left behind a church. They left behind a baby church. They left behind a young church. They left behind an immatured people. But when he was down at Thessalonica, what did the church at Philippi do? Well, you have to read Philippians chapter number 4, because Paul writes to the church at Philippi, and he said, when I departed into Thessalonica, no church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For once and again ye sent unto my necessity. So here he is over in Thessalonica, and this brand new baby church that is very young takes 2 missions journeys with members of their church, and they go down to Thessalonica to supply Paul on the next city. So how was Paul supplied and helped in Thessalonica? Because the church at Philippi was a team with the mission work that was going on there. Teams. Now, we learned earlier that missions is journeys. Missions is journeys. And because missions was journeys, we find also that Paul would use his teams to mentor and disciple the multitude of churches that were being established and left behind. So Paul is in Thessalonica, and they have a church established there, but there's a lot of persecution, there's a lot of suffering there. You study the church at Thessalonica and Philippi, but especially Thessalonica, they had a lot of tribulation. That's addressed in the first letter and in the second letter to the Thessalonians. And Paul has to leave behind a persecuted people, a suffering people. When you read about the churches of Macedonia, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, I do you to the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that's Philippi and Thessalonica, that they were in a great affliction and an abundance of poverty, and yet they took upon themselves the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. They involved themselves in the ministry beyond their own town. Paul gets down, passes into Berea. They end up at Athens. Now, what I can do today is I can get on my phone and I can communicate with people all around the world that we've impacted by ministry. People we've led to the Lord, little churches that we've started. We can still communicate with them. Hey, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? How's the church going? How's your fellowship going? What can I pray with you about? Like, we can encourage them now. But can you imagine when Paul had to leave Thessalonica? And he went to Berea, and he's all the way down in Athens. And while he's there, his heart is crying for the church at Thessalonica. What's happening? Are they okay? Has the affliction overwhelmed them? And when he writes to them later, he said, when I was in Athens, I thought it good to be left alone, to send Timotheus unto you to know your state, how you are. So here's Timothy, a young man who was probably saved on Paul's first missionary journey in Derbe and Lystra when he's there, and now on Paul's second missionary journey, picks him up. And so Timothy's a young man. He's a young missionary. He's not got a ton of experience. He's traveling with Paul, and then he says, Timothy, I need you to go solo for a little bit. I need you to go up to Thessalonica. I need you to check on them. I need you to encourage them. I need to see how you do it. Now, Paul, why don't you go back up there? Well, I could go up there, but have you seen this city wholly given to idolatry? I got to reach this city here, but I'm broken for this city that's back up there. Timothy, I need you to go. So Timothy goes back up to Thessalonica. He sees what's happening in the church. He encouraged them. He fellowships with them. He leaves Thessalonica, and he comes back down, but Paul's not in Athens anymore because he journeyed. I'm always trying to think how they found each other. It's just incredible how they always found each other. Leave a little Post-it note on the pole. Timothy, I've gone on to Corinth. You'll find me there. So Timothy goes down to Corinth, and he finds Paul. And he reports to Paul what he found in Thessalonica. And it was a mixture. There were amazing things happening in Thessalonica, but there were a couple of moral issues and there were a couple of doctrinal issues. So Paul then writes a letter to the Thessalonians, thanking them and praising them and encouraging them for the great work that they were doing. And then he addresses fornication, and he addresses what happens to people when they die, and not to sorrow as others that have no hope. And he puts that letter and he says, Timothy, I need you to take it back and go teach them. So then Timothy goes back up on another journey. And he goes back up and he teaches them. And this is what we find happening all through the epistles and all through the book of Acts. We find that the teams are being utilized to get the mission work done. Now, I've heard people talk about teams, because this is something that people started picking up a little while ago. We're not doing teams. And I want to tell you a model of teams that I don't believe is the biblical model. Sometimes we think, man, if we could get a fully working church, if we could get a pastor, get an assistant pastor, get a youth pastor, get a Sunday school coordinator, get a choir director, get an institute director, we could take this fully working group and we can go sit down in the area, and then we will make a fully functioning church. Each person has to replace themselves, and then we move on and make another church. Well, now that's a whole lot better than sending one guy alone. But that's not what the teams were doing here. It's not how the teams were being utilized in the Scriptures. Look at Galatians chapter 1. Galatians chapter number 1 and verse number 1. By the way, I encourage you to read in 1 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians, by the way, can I just say something about it? God knows how to use the devil. Because in 1 Thessalonians 2:7, you don't have to turn there, he said, brethren, we've been taken from you for a short time, only in presence, not in heart. We've endeavored to see you the more abundantly. We would have come to you once again, even I, Paul, but Satan hindered us. Did Satan hinder Paul? Yeah. Did Satan buffet Paul? Did God give the messenger of Satan to buffet Paul? People say, I wonder what the thorn in the flesh was, Paul. I think it was his eyesight. Did you know the Bible tells you what the thorn in the flesh was? Yes, Paul said there was, because of the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, comma, the messenger of Satan sent to buffet me, comma, lest I should be exalted above measure. So God says the thorn in his flesh was the messenger of Satan sent to buffet him. What happened to Paul everywhere he went? The messenger of Satan was there to buffet him. How many times was he beaten? How many times was he stoned? How many times was he robbed? How many times was he imprisoned? He tells us about it in the Scriptures. How can any man carry on with that much of suffering and that much, right? And who did it? And Paul said, Lord, take it away. And he said, nope. But my grace is sufficient. So it's interesting, Paul said, I would have come back to you once and again, but Satan hindered me. And I wonder if God manipulated Satan to hinder Paul because God didn't want Paul to go back to Thessalonica. Use a member of your team to go back to Thessalonica. You stay at Athens and preach the gospel. You see, Paul's passion for those churches, I don't think he would have ever left them. How many of you pastors know that if God, we were talking about it this morning, if God ever told you to leave a church? Is that an easy thing for a pastor to do? What happened when Paul went down at Ephesus with the elders, and they went down to the ship to tell him goodbye, and he said, I'm not ever coming back. I will not be coming back here. What was the emotional distress of that? They fell on their neck and wept. Because if you do it right, there's a passionate love for the people that you witness to, that you lead to the Lord. It's hard to leave them, especially when the job's not done. especially when there's more maturing, especially when you know there's more teaching, especially you know that when Satan and false apostles and deceitful workers are everywhere attempting to spoil what foundation you've laid there, it's hard to leave. I don't know how Jesus left after 3.5 years. But we have to leave. But we have an asset when we have a team. In Galatians chapter number 1, Paul, an apostle, not of men, neither by man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and who? All the brethren which are with me under the churches of Galatia. Paul wasn't alone. Were there times when Paul was alone? Yep. There were times, and it was usually because he's like, you go over there, and you go over there, and you go over there, and you go over there. I'll manage, okay, I'll meet you back over there. But when you look at the extreme success of the ministry of the Apostle Paul, we get it all wrong when we say Paul's missionary journeys, Paul's missionary journeys, Paul's missionary journey. Paul did this. Look, there are some amazing things in the Bible. Can you look at 1 Thessalonians 1? Who wrote the letter to the Thessalonians? Oh, you think? First Thessalonians 1. Paul and Silvanus and Timotheus under the church of the Thessalonians. Who wrote 1 Thessalonians? Paul and Silvanus and Timotheus. You're going to look through the scriptures. Yes, Paul wrote it. I understand all that. But I want you to see that whenever you look in these scriptures, Paul is letting you know this is not a one-man show. Colossians chapter number 4. Colossians chapter number 4. I love the heart of Paul, who writes to a church he's never been to, but he fathered that church because of the people he led to the Lord that established that church. Colossians 4:7, all my state shall Tychicus declare unto you, who is a beloved brother and a faithful minister and a fellow servant in the Lord, whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate and comfort your hearts with Onesimus. Oh, they went together as a team. Imagine that. A faithful and beloved brother who is one of you. Now notice, Onesimus was a member of what church? He was from the church at Colossae. Please understand that teams are comprised of people from more than one local church. You see, we as independent Baptists sometimes feel like if it's a team, all has to be from my church, my members, so I can have more control or whatever. But I just want you to know, and by the way, the other thing you should know about controlling your missionaries, do you know why the Bible said to lay hands on no man suddenly? Because you were too absent from them to monitor them every day. Technology allows us to over-monitor people that we send and micromanage them, and they need to be micromanaged by the Holy Spirit of God. So they're from different churches, and they work well together. Something that has been beautiful, you're going to meet a lot of people today that are going to be sharing some testimonies that we've been doing teamwork. Brother Isaac Davis, you know, he has entrusted members of his church to go on journeys with me, and we've got Family Baptist Church and Grace Baptist Church in DuPont. Like, we're not all from the same church, but you know what's amazing when we get on that team? It is as if we are just one little, we wouldn't even know we're from different churches. Onesimus, who is one of you, a faithful and beloved brother, they shall make known unto you all things which are done here. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, saluteth you, and Marcus, that's John Mark, sister son to Barnabas, touching whom ye received commandments, if he come unto you, receive him. And Jesus, which is called Justus, who is of the circumcision, these only are my what? Fellow workers under the kingdom of God, and have been a comfort to me. Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Christ, saluteth you. Verse 14, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. Tychicus, Onesimus, Aristarchus, Marcus, Justus, Epaphras, Luke, and Demas. 8 men. And what did Paul say? He said, these men are such a comfort to me. And he said, we are fellow workers under the kingdom of God. 2 Timothy chapter number 4. Second Timothy chapter number 4, verse number 9. Do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. For Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed to Thessalonica. Cretans to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. So what's happening to his team? They're being spread. Only Luke is with me. Take Mark and bring him with thee, for he is profitable to me for the ministry. Tychicus have I sent to Ephesus. The cloak that I left at Troas with Carpus, when thou comest, bring with thee and the books, but especially the parchments. And this is where I know I'd be a good friend with Paul. Because like, you guys come, and could you pick up my coat that I left over there? And my books are sitting over there. Could you pick them up and bring them with me? Right, Andrew? Andrew's been on several mission trips with me. And look, anybody who gets to know me very well, they're like, it is a miracle of God you get anything done in this world. Because I am not an administrative person. It just looks like I am. The Holy Ghost and the teammates make me look good. But I'm forever having little things I've left there, things I didn't pack there, things I didn't do there. And we get there on the first day, and I'm like, man, my phone's about to die. And I'm like, man, I need, and Andrew's like, opens up, and he brought an extra power bank for me because he knows my phone is always dying and not charged. And he's like, I'm going to make sure his phone always stays charged. Andrew, thank you very much. Because I have other people like, why can't you be more responsible with your stuff? Yeah. And I say, I don't know. Boiling in my head today, I've got a group of pastors in India that I've been mentoring. I've got a couple guys in Pakistan that I've been communicating with. I've been communicating with the brethren that are over in Africa. I'm thinking about my family, my children, my wife, all these types of things. I don't know why I can't remember where I put my keys. What are you doing with your life? Oh, yeah, you just manage a calendar. Woo, good for you. Could you help me manage my calendar too? That'd be nice. Different people have different giftings that make the team work. It's very good we're not all the same. If you look, the Bible says even when the giftings of in Corinthians, those gifts that have ceased, but he said to one is given, to one is given, to one is given, to one is given. You look in Romans 12 when he talks about the gifting, he said to this one is given the administration, to that one is given faith, to that one is given mercy, to that one is given that. Do you know why God gave you a gift? Because he expects you to be part of the team. And which part of the team is most important? You don't have a member of the team less important than another member of the team. You can have a quarterback, but he can't throw a touchdown and catch a touchdown. He can't do both of them. Teams. I was thinking about 2 Timothy 1:16. 2 Timothy 1:16. The Lord give mercy to the house of Onesiphorus, for he oft refreshed me, and was not ashamed of my chain. But when he was in Rome, he sought me out very diligently and found me. The Lord grant unto him that he may find mercy of the Lord in that day, and in how many things he ministered unto me at Ephesus, thou knowest very well. You know what Onesiphorus did with his ministry? He said, I got to make sure Paul keeps going. And he says, that man just ministered to me. Kept me going. God grant him mercy in that day for how he held me. That may be the gift that God gives you. You say, but I'm not a really good preacher, I'm not a really good evangelist, but I don't know what other things Onesiphorus did. He said, when my chain, he said there was a lot of people that were ashamed of me when I was bound up in that chain, but Onesiphorus found me, and he refreshed me. And I think the fact that Paul makes mention of being refreshed by him, I think that means that Paul, there were times, when Paul talks about Ephesus, do you know what he says in Ephesus? When you read Ephesus in the book of Acts, it is the most amazing ministry you've ever seen. He's in the school of Tyrannus. He's disputing daily, and people are getting saved all over Asia. The silversmiths there are losing income because of the impact of the ministry that's there. But you read what Paul writes about Ephesus and other places. He said, I have fought with men like beasts. And he said at Ephesus, he said in Asia, he said, you know what trouble I had there, to the point that I despaired even of life. And then he says, you know what Onesiphorus meant to me when I was at Ephesus, and in how many ways he ministered to me. Let me tell you, we would not have a book of Acts like we have it today if Paul didn't have teams. Paul didn't have teams. So let me just share a little bit with you, and we're going to introduce some testimonies here in a little bit. A little bit, you probably hear me talk about Zambia all the time because that just happens to be the thing we're doing right now. I'm going to show you how God has used it to teach me some things as well. Because as God was teaching me certain principles, Zambia kind of became the place to test it. You ever need to test your model? I was pastoring at Apple Valley Baptist Church, and God was showing me a model, and I'm like, I need to test it. Because if it works, I'm going to go tell other pastors about it. And if I've not tested it, they're going to go, you're some crazy missionary. What do I as a pastor of a local church do? How would this ever work for me? I'm just a pastor of a local church. We started to hear, just after 2020, a missionary had come through, David Ray, and was telling our church about how red hot Zambia is, how open it is, and how desperate we need workers to be there. Our church began to pray about it, and after a period of time, we sent 4 young adults from our church to go to Zambia for 2 months. They went for 2 months to serve alongside the missionary. And then when they came back from that trip, you know, they reported to us how amazing Zambia was, how open it is. And we as a church family began to pray about maybe getting a bit more serious as a church about going back and doing some ministry in Zambia. We've been asking God to send us to places. We'd taken a trip to Guadalajara, Mexico. We'd taken a trip to remote Alaskan villages, and we were knocking on doors. There were opportunities that were open. We were knocking on doors. We were sending a group, and we were coming back. But it didn't seem like those are kind of one-offs. Okay, we went, we ministered, we blessed, but we didn't have that burden that God wanted us to keep plowing on that field. You know, it's okay to knock on some doors, to send some people, see if the door's opening or not. So after a while, it must have been a year after that group of young people were there, we as a church family took our first really church. We had the team of young adults that went, but this was now going to be a real church effort. And I think we had 9 people from our church. And we went to Zambia. And we had 4 objectives on this mission trip. One is that we wanted to bless and encourage the missionaries that were there. If the only thing that happens is we're Onesiphorus on this, and if we go bless and refresh the missionaries so that they carry on, we would consider that an accomplishment. The second thing that we would do is we would evangelize around that church. Wherever that missionary's church is, we're just going to go evangelize, we're going to witness, we're going to try to lead people to the Lord. Thirdly, we want to minister in that church, and we want to be an encouragement to the local church that is on the ground for them to carry on. Maybe we can help disciple them. But the fourth objective was this: God, do you have something more for our church here than just this one mission trip? We didn't know. You know, it's okay to not know. We just knocked on that door. We had been almost 3 weeks in Zambia. Towards the end of the second week, a man that had gotten saved had shared his testimony on Facebook. And a friend of his read his testimony about salvation. This guy was so excited that salvation was by grace. He finally figured out that it's not works, it's not that. He got saved. He published his testimony, and his friend read the testimony. And I was tagged in his post, so that friend communicated with me, and he said, I'd like to join you. I'd like to hear this message as well. And I said, why don't you come to church on Sunday, and after church I'll sit down and talk with you about this gospel. And he said, I live a little bit far away. And I said, what's a little bit far? He said, I live in Mongu. I'm like, I don't know where Mongu is. So I went to Brother Ray, the missionary. I said, where's Mongu? He said, brother, that is on the other side of the country, all the way on the western border, almost to Angola. I said, how long does it take to get there? He's like 10 hours on like some of the worst treacherous roads in Africa. Is that a Macedonian call? Or because you can get, I think Pastor mentioned, you get someone from another country going, we would like to come. And you're like, okay, is this a con? Or is this genuine? Or is this real? How do you know? You go to prayer. We took our team to prayer. God, do you want us to do this? God, do you want us to go to Mongu? Is this of you? It's going to cost us $1,000 to do it. Our church, we are a no-money church. We don't have money. Anything that we're doing right now is so far out of our budget, it's just unrealistic to do any of it. Just being there was a miracle. We didn't have $1,000 to rent a four-wheel drive vehicle and to get hotels and to take our team over there. So I sent a message back to our church, and I said, hey, any way you guys can scrape $1,000 together so that we could go over for this one guy? They took an offering, sent the money immediately, so we decided to go. I told the guy that got saved, I said, can you take a couple days off work and come with us? Because, do you know Mongo? He said, yes, I'm from there. And he said, good. Can you please come with us? Can you how's our English? English there is about 50-50. Okay, you come and translate. So he went with us. We're traveling over to Mongo. He loses communication about 2.5 hours out because his phone died. And he said, don't worry, they told me they'll be at such and that he will be at this roundabout waiting for us. I'm like, okay. We get into Mongu. It was just crazy from the moment we got in, but long story, we get down to that roundabout, and there's that man Michael standing there, and he's got 3 friends with him. So we pick him up. We get over to our little lodge that we found to stay in, and I said to them, okay, I said, tomorrow at 3 o'clock, come meet us here at this hotel. We're going to go out. We're just going to try and evangelize and see what might happen here. We're going to go out and evangelize. We're going to invite people to come back here at 3. Come back at 3, and then we'll share the gospel with you. And they stood there looking at me. And they said, no, can you tell us that gospel now? Then I felt like really dumb. Here's fish that jumped in the boat, and I'm saying, I'll clean you tomorrow. It's a dream come true to have fish jump in your boat. So we sit down at that table, and this young man who got saved preaches the gospel to all of them. He takes about a half an hour to explain to them how he had misunderstood grace and works. Like I said, just share. He went like 20 minutes. He got done, and I started sharing the gospel. At the end of that, all 4 of those guys got saved. The next morning at 9 o'clock, they all showed up. We had a bunch of gospel tracts with us, but they had the phone number of the missionary in Lusaka. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So I say to these guys who all just got saved last night, could we have one of your phone numbers to put on here so that if people get saved, because we're leaving tomorrow, that they could call you. So they all sat down for about an hour and wrote one of the guys' phone numbers, and off we go onto the street, and they showed up to go with us. We went out, we evangelized. About 30 or so people came to that meeting. And I think 14, 15, 16 people got saved. And you need to understand something about the way I present the gospel. I'm not manipulating someone into a sinner's prayer. Their soul is too precious for them to not really understand the gospel. I took an hour and a half with a whiteboard talking about the gospel, diagramming it. I explained it this way. I explained it that way. When I started preaching, the guy that came from Lusaka with me was translating, but it was tough. Where's our Spanish pastor? I just saw him here. He went out. He's a great translator. The Spanish pastor downstairs, great translator. This guy who was translating with me was doing a terrible job. A guy raised his hand. And he says, he's doing a terrible job translating. Can I translate for him? So here a visitor comes. And now this guy, his name is also Mike. He came because he heard white people were giving jobs. When he found out it was a church service, he started to walk away. But one of the guys said, please just stay and listen to the message. You're here, you might as well stay. So now he ends up being my translator. So I translate for an hour and a half. I diagram the gospel. I explain it this way. I explain it that way. I explain it that way. I explain it that way. And then we get done, and I say, okay. I said, I've explained the gospel. I said, do you understand what we've explained, and do you believe what's been explained? Would anybody like to testify? No heads bowed, no eyes closed, no none of that. A guy at the back raises his hand up. And he said, I always thought salvation was because of your good works and law keeping. But I've heard today that Jesus paid for all of my sins on the cross and shed his blood, and I believe and I have accepted Christ. Now, there's no mistake whether he understood the gospel. But he got done, then another hand went up. Each one stood up and testified. Then another one stood up and testified. Then another one stood up and testified. Then another one stood up and testified. And then finally my translator said, hey, I've attended the Salvation Army Church, and I've never heard the salvation story. He said, but it's true. It's Jesus only. I believe. That guy, 2 years later, still, all those guys are still in our church today. Then we left the next day to come back. Now, I'm going to tell you, you want your gut to be wrenched? Leave that group behind. We got a notebook out, said if you got saved or if you're interested, please put your name and phone number down here. And then we gave the name and phone number to the original guy who asked me to come. Said, okay, what you need to do, keep calling these people, and on Sunday you guys meet together. We gave a couple Bibles and said, just pick a place in the Bible and read it. We will come back. I don't know when, I don't know how, but you guys just meet together until we get back. How's that for a great church planting model? We get back to our home church. We have an answer to our fourth question, don't we? God, do you have something more for us to do? I went to Brother Ray, the missionary, and I said, can you get out to Mongo? He said, brother, I can't. He said, there's no way I can get out there and come here. I'm here, we've got this, we've got that. So I went home and told our church, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So 2 months later, we took two, how old were those guys? 19, 20? Ephraim and Joseph. At that time, we sent them. They were like 19, just a couple years ago. How old's Ephraim? Yeah, he's 19. We took two 19-year-olds. And we commissioned them, and we sent them back to Africa. We said, we need you guys to go back there. Timothy I've sent, Titus I've sent, right? Go back there. Here's the phone numbers. Start calling those people, get them together, and we're commissioning you to baptize those as well that you find that are saved. So these guys went, they started finding them, they started discipling, they baptized 3 guys. And then they came back. Now what do? Now we have saved and baptized people. So we took another trip. Now, by the time we took another trip, I had gone down to preach Camp Forge in Southern California and met members of Brother Isaac Davis Church. And some of the young people came back from there, that camp, fired up going, we need to go to the mission field. And so I get a call from Brother Lockwood and from Brother Isaac saying, hey, could we send some people from our church to join your mission trip going to Zambia? And I'm like, yes, you can. God started to build our team. And as we've taken multiple trips in and out, we've taken members from over 8 different churches now that have joined our teams and become part of the mission work that we're doing. And it's expanding. The church in Mongu is now responsible for the church that's opened up in Mumbwa and the one that's opening up in Moyo, and now we're going back into the heart of Lusaka. And you know how we're doing this? We're just doing the simple things that I just told you. We as a church got together and said, I think God's opening a door. Let's go over there. Let's sow some seeds. Let's water the seeds, and let's see what God does. It may be that God will work for us. We don't know. You don't have to know all the answers. When Abraham sent his servant to find a bride for his wife, for his son, he said, I being in the way, the Lord led me. You just get in the way. You start going. The command was go. Go ye into all the world. Preach the gospel to every creature. It may be that the Lord will work for you. It may be that the Lord will open doors for you. It may be that God does something. You may come back and say, nothing happened. Don't give up. Go knock on another door. Now, As I've been preaching in churches, we've now taken multiple people with us, and this is what I said. We need ordinary people in our teams. Let me expand just a little bit now. I was in Faith Baptist Church. You heard the testimony of their pastor on video Monday night. And I said, I need a mechanic to go with us because we're going to start transporting Bibles because God opened doors for us. Like the military in Zambia asked us if we would bring a Bible to every soldier in their country. And I said, provided we can preach to them as well. And then I met the head of the Zambian chaplaincy, and he said, can you bring a Bible for all the police as well? He said, I'll let you go into any police station across this country. We'll gather the police officers and their families together. You can preach to them. You can give Bibles to them. We already sent a container of Bibles over there, and we need another container of Bibles because we're not done going to all the areas. But we can't get to all the areas because we don't have enough people in our teams. We need to send teams up there and teams up there and teams up there. What do you do when the doors of a country open wide open, but there's not enough people to go through it? And we don't have enough time for an 8-year training program. So I said, we need a mechanic because we got a truck. We're going to take this truck across the country, and I'm not sure it can make it or not. Sitting in that church was a man named Ronnie. Ronnie is a mechanic. He teaches mechanics at a college. And Ronnie had gotten discouraged with missions several years ago. In fact, he told me, he said, I stopped giving to missions because I didn't like the way missions was going. He repented and he said, I started giving to missions again. He said, but when you said, I need a mechanic. And he's like, well, I'm a mechanic. The pastor said, Ronnie, would you go on that trip? He said, God would have to do a miracle with my schedule at college and God did a miracle with his schedule at college. I need a mechanic. On our way to Mongu, after we'd left Mumbu, on our way to Mongu, we were just about to get to that part of the world that wrecks good cars, and we're going to take our flatbed truck there. And Ronnie said, I just want to do a walk around. And he started doing a walk around the truck, and he said, won't make it. And I said, why not? And something under where the tray sits down, there's these 2x4s that run along with the clams. They were all busted and falling off. He said, we're about 3 bumps away from the whole back of that truck falling off. And I said, Ronnie, there's more than 3 bumps on the way to Mongu. I mean, the craters of the moon aren't as bad as what we have on this road. So here's Ronnie. That guy had brought every tool on earth with him, and out comes his tools, out comes that. And he's like, I need you to go into the forest and cut down a stick and chop me a thing like this. I mean, we're chopping the jungle down, and I don't know what he did, but he said, we'll make it now. We made it all the way over, but he said it'll never make it back. We get over there, and Ronnie's like, I'm going to have to fix the truck. So he found a local mechanic, and the local mechanic was tearing apart a transmission, and that's what Ronnie does. He builds transmissions. That's what he teaches kids to do. So he jumps down there and says, hey, let me help you, and he starts working with them down there. And they're like, what's this guy doing? And God opened up doors of ministry to him. He was so sad that he wasn't out on the streets with us. I said, Ronnie, you are with us. We can't get anywhere. We can't get the Bibles anywhere if you don't keep that truck running. And I said, by the way, Ronnie, who did you meet? We went back on the last day. He was like Prince Charles walking into the mechanic place. I mean, they loved him to death. And I said, I would have never met those people. They wouldn't given me the time of day. A mechanic. Because he can fix cars and he can win souls and he can disciple. We take medics with us. Pastor Nikita, my pastor, just wave your hand back there. Pastor Nikita was part of our team. He's an ER nurse. And so I said, I need you to go study the country and find out everything that can kill us there, all the diseases that are there, and prep us for it. And you ought to see the medical bags that we take with us on that trip. We're ready for anything. We were over in Mongu, and a bunch of these guys that got saved wanted to get baptized. And so we're looking for a swimming pool. We can't find anything, but they said if we go down to this floodplains, and that's where the Zambezi River floods the plains, and there's all these little rivers and tributaries, and we're going to baptize there. And then Pastor Nikita said, you're not baptizing in that river. And I said, why? And he starts describing all the things that are there that if they get into me are going to eat my brain and eat my everything. He's like, you are not getting in any of that water. And I said, Brother Nikita, those guys are going to get baptized. They're going to get in that water. So I'm going to get in the water, and I'm going to baptize them. You research the pill I need to pop to fix whatever gets inside of me. So there he is, researching everything in the world to make sure that I stay alive. You know, when you're in countries like Zambia, you get in a car accident, there's no ambulance coming for you. There's nobody coming to fix you. You have to know what to do. You keep yourself alive when you're there. You got to know how to suture yourself up. You got to know how to stop a major artery bleed. You have to know what medicine to give you. You go to half of those clinics, they'll kill you worse than the thing you came with that was killing you. We need medics to go. The more high-risk country you go to, you need people with a security background to go with you. Because if you don't have a security background, right, you don't pay attention to important things. Right? We were being set up for a robbery at one point in Lusaka. I didn't notice it, but the guy who did security noticed it. And he's like, Pastor, we're leaving right now. You're going that way. The other guys are going that way. I'm witnessing to somebody. I said, I got to have 5 minutes. He said, you have 2. Right? People with a security background. You go into some more high-risk countries, you need to know a little bit better how to do an assessment. Right? And we've got people in our churches who are really good when it comes to security. We're not going to fight anybody. We're not going to kill anybody. But we need to know where to go, where not to go, what are some of the risks so that we can mitigate those risks. Technology. Do you know that more people are coming to the Lord today through this than almost any other means? Like, we need guys that have a technology background that can start making us get good at utilizing this tool so that we can get the Word of God where it's going. Thankfully, on our last trip, we needed tracks. There was a graphic designer at Brother Casey's church. They designed a beautiful set of tracks that we took to Mongo with us. We need money. We need people who can help finance it. We need people who can do logistics. I was down in Lompoc, California, and I met with a young man back in the sound booth, and he told me that he worked for Space Force. He works for NASA and Space Force. I can't remember how it worked. And I said, what do you do? And he said, well, my team monitors all the satellites to make sure that no satellites and no space junk ever collide in space. So we monitor it, and we maneuver satellites where need be to keep everything in space from crashing. I'm like, that's so cool. And we were talking about wanting to go into Sierra Leone. There's an area that's never been reached, never been contacted. No white person has ever gone in there, and they know there's a few tribes there. And I was just having a conversation how we need guys who can do land navigation. We need all these guys who do it for fun in the States to go do it for real over there. And I said, and he said, oh, I can find those people for you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, you let me know when you're ready to go in. And he said, I can use one of our satellites. And he said, I will find the people, and I'll even give you a picture of their face if you want it. Is that legal? Can you actually do that? Do we need guys like that can help guide us? Brother Stallman can tell you stories about Jason Dover and what it's like to almost die being lost in a jungle trying to find an unreached people group. Do we need people who can do that? Absolutely. Do we need people who are really good with logistics and planning? Because I fly by the seat of my pants in everything I do, and God puts logistical people around me. They're like, hey, we can do that, but here's your list of 10 tasks that have to be done before we do it. And I'm like, I hate lists. Can't we just go? You got to have the logistical people to row you in. You know how we can get the job done? With teams. So I'm going to stop with that because I've gone way over time. But I want you to know that your church, no matter how big it is an asset with teams. A brother was supposed to be here from Washington. One of his kids was in a car accident this week, so he didn't come. He had a missions conference in January. Myself and another missionary came and preached, and there were 7 members of his church at that missions conference. And he said, brother, I want to do it 5 nights. I want you both to preach. I'm like, to seven people? You're going to 2? And probably the biggest offerings I've ever got came from that little church of 7 people. And they have already helped fund the shipping cost of getting that container of Bibles to Zambia that we sent. They have been funding stuff in some other unique parts of the world. There are 7 people in eastern Washington, a rural town, but they have not said our size disqualifies us from being a team player in getting the gospel around the world. And I thought, man, if a church 10 times your size was doing proportionately what you're doing, we would reach the entire world. Teams. All church strategy. Missions is journeys. Missions is teams. Now, I know what you're saying. How do we start? How do we start? Where's Brother Teasdale? Is he here or did he walk out? He's going to testify this evening, but I just want to say I was at his church 2 years ago and preached this. How big's your church, sister? Maybe 60 people. By the way, it's these churches this size that are embracing this, to be honest with you. Sat down and preached it, and one of the men in the church, he raised his hand and he said, at the end of this series, he said, I've got 2 things I want to say. He said, first of all, he said, this is extremely overwhelming. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, putting the responsibility of reaching the entire world on our church, that's very overwhelming. It was a lot easier to write a check and pray for missionaries. And he said, secondly, how do we start? And I said, on your face. Now, most pastors are administrative guys, logistical guys, and they want to start writing a plan on day 1. This pastor right here, he's ready. Let's do it. I'm like, whoa, this guy's moving at lightning speed up here. You know what you do? You get on your face before God and you say, God, what does this mean, and what do you want us to do? The details of how you will implement this come from God, not from you. The Spirit said, separate me Barnabas and Saul for the work whereunto I have called them. The Spirit said, not Asia, not there, over there. You don't know what to do. You don't know when to do it. You don't know where to do it. You know you're supposed to do it. But isn't that what surrender is always supposed to be like? We say this to an individual. You'll never know God's will until you unconditionally present your body to God and say, God, whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want, Lord, I'm in. My answer is yes before you even tell me what it is. You know where you start as a pastor with your church? Because I'm going to tell you, this is scary. Because God will do things you can't control. God will do things that you can't micromanage. And like we feel safe with the things that we can manage. We feel safe with the things that we can control. But when God does this, He's going to control it, not you, not me, not anybody else. He's going to do it. And it's a risk. But we've already learned we're a risk-averse generation. Let me just keep it small. Let me just keep it controllable. Let me just keep it safe. I don't want to lose it. It might all fall apart. Hey, no risk, no reward. So what you do as a pastor, what you do as a church is you just fall on your face before God. And hopefully you get a pastor and a church together on this. Because if the pastor gets it and the people don't, it's not going to work. If the people get it and the pastor don't, it's not going to work. Got to get on your face and say, God, we don't know what to do. Wasn't that Hezekiah? Lord, there's great armies come against us. Great military general. We don't know what to do. But our eyes are upon you. And God will tell you what to do. You say, but God, we prayed and God's not telling us anything. When it's time, God talks. And if you ask God and He didn't say anything but to carry on as you are, keep doing it. Keep seeking. And when God speaks, be like Samuel. Speak, Lord. Thy servant heareth.